Well, ABC57 is celebrating Black History Month all month long in February.
And tonight, we take a deep dive into the history of bank redlining in the city of South Bend.
ABC57's Emily Arnold is live in studio tonight with recovering and rebuilding after redlining and the long-term impacts of that now illegal process on minority neighborhoods and families. Emily?
Hey, Brian and Jennifer, redlining was a practice used to deny minority families, mostly black, from borrowing money to build or buy homes in certain neighborhoods, thus segregating neighbors by the color of their skin. Well, a lot of my time was spent learning about the history of redlining, things that happened years and years ago. The impact of these historically discriminatory practices, like you mentioned, still remains today. And now, under new leadership, locals hope to see District 2 be built up to the same standards as other neighboring areas. Driving through South Bend down Jefferson Boulevard, you may be charmed by the rows of historic homes. Drive a little further and you'll see a different view. Boarded up windows, rundown houses, and junk in the yards. It's an example of how racist redlining practices still impact the city of South Bend today. But in order to determine the best ways to move forward, we have to understand how we got here. Redlining is a practice stretching all the way back to the 1930s. The federal government came up with a system to give some people government-issued mortgages to prevent foreclosures during the Depression. To decide who got the money, maps were created labeling the best neighborhoods as ethnically homogeneous and the worst as hazardous, where mostly black, Mexican, and other minorities lived, often surrounded by red lines on the maps. That means banks wouldn't offer mortgages to them like they did to whites in the more desirable areas. Christy Erickson with the South Bend History Museum says these practices had lasting impacts on families here locally.
Couldn't get a loan for a place that wasn't in the slums or wasn't affected by industrial pollution or other things that might affect your health. And often they had to turn to predatory lending practices or other things that would cause lasting effects on that family in order to be able to find a place to live at all.
Being forced to rent, while whites in other neighborhoods easily obtained mortgages to purchase their homes, made generational wealth disproportionate in the city, giving whites an advantage over blacks.
It was considered inharmonious to mix racial groups in neighborhoods and just something that you didn't do. Though it was segregation was illegal, however, this was a way to get around that by saying, well, we just don't think that's a good idea.
Later, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed the practice of redlining, but the damage had already been done, and some impacts still remain today. Someone who lived through all of this is South Bend resident George Jones.
I'm Emily.
Emily, I'm George Jones.
Nice to meet you.
He recalls growing up in the 2nd District. Even though he was young, the change he says he saw city leaders initiate wasn't the kind of change the neighbors there needed.
My mother and I, we lived in a project with some old projects that were out here. You probably have heard about the projects they had, the brick projects, but there was another set of projects that were out here too before they had the Charles Black Center. And the projects that we lived in, they tore them down, tore all of them down, okay? And so I would go away to school and I come back and they put up some more projects. That was disheartening to me, okay? If you have projects and you put another slew of projects in this neighborhood, where's the improvement?
Jones and his wife were both educators, a job many blacks held, especially women, during that time. Despite his criticisms, the couple still lives in the same neighborhood.
I could have built this house somewhere else, okay? Based on the income that my wife and I had. You know, there are a lot of educators, live in the suburbs. But as I indicated to you, I chose purposely to build this house here.
Jones says his love for children made him want to stay.
As I was growing up, there were significant black role models in the community that influenced me to go to school.
Someone with a similar story, Mike Jackson of South Bend, who was also one of the first black students at the old Marquette School. His family pioneered a movement that would go on to set the precedent for fair housing for black families in South Bend.
My dad came to South Bend. Now the ladies had already come. And he came to South Bend after World War II as a veteran. So we lived in the military housing for returning veterans from World War II on Prairie Avenue. That's where we lived. But my parents and my folks and all of them together had an idea. We could make some better homes.
Jackson's dad worked at the Studebaker factory, where a group of black co-workers decided they wanted to secure housing away from the slums and factories they lived by, leading to the creation of what's known as the Better Homes of South Bend. With whites moving into the suburbs as more blacks started to come back from World War II, black families were left to secure land in less developed parts of the city. And that's what they did. 2 blocks of land were secured on North Elmer Street. But finding a contractor to get the ball rolling on the homes was their next challenge. After facing discrimination and other setbacks, it wasn't until 3 years after the creation of Better Homes that 22 homes were finally ready to be occupied on North Elmer Street.
We were the first house at 1706 Elmer Street to be built, to be finished, and we moved in.
Though this was decades ago, the long-term impacts of redlining are still seen today. Working to reverse some of the discriminatory practices from back then is newly elected City Councilwoman Ophelia Gooden-Rogers. Gooden-Rogers is an experienced community activist, a fellow black woman who grew up on North Sadie Street. She's now looking to make some real change in South Bend's 2nd District, where she still lives today. Walking down the street she grew up on, Gooden-Rogers recalls a different kind of neighborhood back in the day.
This neighborhood was beautiful. I mean, we had a house. Houses were on top of houses, and we kept our parents kept our homes up, and all the neighbors knew one another. Today, I don't know how many neighbors know each other.
And that's something she hopes to change. Among Gooden-Rogers' many plans for the district, bringing neighborhood associations back together and garnering a sense of community again all across the 2nd District. But it won't be an overnight success.
Every neighborhood in District 2 has something that it needs. And my goal this summer is to try to get my precinct people out so that they can canvass their neighborhoods and see what it is that we're going to be proposing to try to get help for people. And then what we also like to do is we would like to inform the people.
Looking at the long-term goals, Gooden-Rogers says housing is still something she plans to address, bringing new homes and apartments to the area. She also wants to look at repairing sidewalks, streets, and curbs.
My goal is to help people. I want to see people happy.
And people like George Jones hope to see this kind of investment on the West Side, and soon.
That's why I put my house here. This is an investment into my community. This is my investment.
Well, if you're interested in learning more about the history and long-term impacts of redlining here in our city, the History Museum in South Bend will keep its Undesigned the Redline exhibit open to the public now through July 14th. You can find some more information on redlining and more Black History Month coverage on our website, ABC57.com. Live in studio, Emily Arnold, ABC57 News.